Thank the sports gods we have golf. After a fun start at Colonial, we head to Hilton Head and the RBC Heritage. Rory McIlroy, once again, the favorite. He's the world #1. This despite a rough Sunday at the Charles Schwab. He was in contention before firing a 4-over-74, finished outside the top 30. It's the first time he's placed outside the top 5 since August. Once again, the top 5 players in the world are in the field for this tour stop, and we're going to break it all down for you right here on HQ. Justin Thomas and Bryson DeChambeau, 16-1. DeChambeau, oh so close from getting in that playoff last week, finished 1 shot off the lead and out of the playoff. John Rahm, by the way, 18-1, 4th best odds. He missed the cut altogether. Our grouping of Kyle Porter, Rick Gehman, and Doug Bell joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. Kyle, what do you think about Rory once again being the favorite? A little bit more value on taking him this week than last week, but do you think there's any hope that he can come through with a victory here?
Yeah, I think the value is great because you're getting the same player that you got last week. He didn't putt very well last week. He had a bad Sunday. But you're getting the best player in the world, the best guy over the last couple of years from tee to green, and you're getting them at a place where it's incredibly valuable to be really good from tee to green at Harbor Town. So I went into last week thinking like, that's kind of those odds on Rory coming off the pandemic. Those are kind of tough. But going into this week, I think there's a ton of value there for him to bounce back and possibly even win this event.
It's great to see Rory back at Harbor Town, and that's the great thing. He's going to play the first 3 events. The last time he played, the only other time the RBC Heritage was back in 2009 when he was 19 years old, and he had this bushy hair popping out underneath his Jumra hat. Remember when he wore Jumra? That was his big sponsor. He tied for 58. I think he's excited to be back, especially after an off week at Colonial. And keep in mind now, as good as he is off the tee and with his irons, Rory is 3rd overall in scrambling on the PGA Tour this season. And that's important because you don't hit a lot of greens at Harbor Town. You have to get up and down. And I think what we're going to see on display is a golfer who is much better his second week out than he was his first week. And we're also going to see how masterful he really is from around the greens. This kid is a superstar, and it'll be on display this week.
Yeah, let's talk about those value numbers. 12-1. I mean, I'm not usually a guy who likes to bet the favorite because golf is so volatile and anybody can win any week, as we saw last week with Daniel Berger. But 12-1 certainly perked my ears up. Rory lives in the 7-1, 8-1 range, which is kind of a joke. I mean, to imply that he's going to win the golf tournament, as great as Rory is, as often as he would need to win it to be 7 or 8-1, that's a little bit hairy. But you're looking at 12-1. That is much closer in line with what his actual win equity and how many times he would actually win this golf tournament. So if there was ever a time to bet a favorite, if there was ever a time to bet Rory McIlroy, this is the number.
Dustin Johnson is 28-1. He had some extra time to prepare for this tournament after missing the cut last week. Returning to the site of where it kind of all began to unravel for him, Doug, as world #1 back in 2019.
Yeah, shot 77 that final day, and CT Pan went on to win. That was almost inexplicable how that happens to a player the caliber of Dustin Johnson. But keep in mind, this will be the 3rd straight year he's played the RBC Heritage. He also plays the RBC Canadian now because RBC is a huge sponsor of his. And when he played at Harbor Town 3 years ago, he decided, I'm going to hit driver. That's what I do best. And he averaged 311 yards off the tee that first year. Last year, 299 yards off the tee. Significant because the PGA Tour average at Harbor Town is 267 yards. No one had ever seen a player take these aggressive lines. Of course, now we have this incredible field, and I think a lot of players will play long ball like DJ. But let's keep in mind, DJ during the break spent a lot of time on his boat with Polina and the kids, and admittedly said, I just didn't play a lot of golf. And last week we saw that. He's like a boxer trying to get back into shape, maybe a heavyweight champion trying to get his body back lean and mean. I mean, he's like a player, a baseball player in spring training. He's just getting it back. So I think DJ is a really good value this week. having played this event now 3 years in a row and coming off a week he didn't play well, he'll certainly be better now in his second week.
That spring training analogy from Doug there is one that I really like. DJ working himself into shape on the tour. A lot of guys opted to do that during the break. But yeah, this really was a turning point for DJ. I mean, he would have the meltdown on Sunday last year at this event. He played well at the PGA Championship a few weeks later, but then after that there was nothing. One top 10 in a full field event on tour since then. That is very un-DJ-like, and it's a lot been because of his flat stick. He's lost strokes putting in 11 of his last 13 measured events, and that's really what got him to the #1 player in the world. He learned to hit his wedges because he was always so good off the tee, and he got to be one of the better putters, or at least a positive putter. That has seemed to gone away recently, so it'll be interesting to see if he can get that flat stick to cooperate this week. And once it does get back into shape, he's going to contend quite a bit.
That's a great point by Rick. His putting is super underrated. But, I think for me, it's something that you mentioned, Chris. Just over the last year, he's been really lackluster. I mean, you have the runner-up, the PGA Championship at Bethpage last May. And since then, it's just been, I mean, for DJ, honestly, it's been a lot of mediocrity. He's been very mediocre for the last year. So I think if I'm saying, well, he'll just get back to being DJ. Well, that might have been true for everything beyond the last year, but the last year of DJ hasn't been that great. So I don't know what he's getting back to. Now, do I think that he's going to be in that mediocrity range forever? No, of course not. He's one of the most talented golfers of all time. But for right now, I just don't know what we're getting back to at this point in DJ's season.
Dustin Johnson, again, coming into this thing 28-1. Last year had a chance to win it and then blew up late. It was CT Pan who ended up winning the RBC Heritage. But Rick, I mean, he's really been a non-factor for the last year. What's going on? More missed cuts than made cuts.
Certainly has been. He's now ranked 99th in the world. He's missed 6 of his last 7 missed cuts. I mean, since that win. He has won top 10 since that win last year, and it just hasn't been good for CT Pan. I think his skill set, as we mentioned with a lot of guys on tour, it translates well only a few times a year, which unfortunately is not the majority of events on the PGA Tour, where it benefits bombers and guys that could just throw it out there and bomb and gouge their way to victory. But CT Pan is in a bit of a funk, and honestly, that's no different from 2 years ago, Satoshi Kodaira, after he won here at Harbor Town. And even 3 years back, Wes Bryant. All 3 of those past champions have really struggled as of late.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Rick, because I think it speaks to just how different Harbor Town is. We talk about some guys that are not as long on the PGA Tour, and they can only win at a Harbor Town, at maybe a Colonial, at some of these shorter courses. And I think that speaks to just the variation in what Harbor Town is compared to what the rest of the PGA Tour is. And so I think you see, this is why guys like Bryson are trying to get so long, because the rest of the PGA Tour season, it benefits you to be really, really long. And this is also a tournament that, look, the field hasn't been that great over the last however many years because it follows the Masters. It's usually right after the Masters, and not as many guys play in it. So I think what has happened to CT Pan speaks more about how different this course and this tournament are than maybe it does about his game in general.
CT Pan will be paired with Rory McIlroy and Ricky Fowler among the featured groups on Thursday and Friday. Now, if the gallery was there like normal, I would feel really bad for CT Pan, because there'd be a massive gallery all watching Rory and Ricky and yelling for them. The fact there's no gallery may help him and ease some of that pressure a little bit, but even still, playing with Rory and Ricky, which he normally would not, he wouldn't be paired with those guys normally. The fact he's the defending champion, that's why he's in there. I still don't think he's going to play very well. In fact, as Rick mentioned, those names, those first-time winners the last few years at RBC Heritage, the field is so different now. It's the best they've ever had. 124 winners. It is really remarkable. In fact, some are saying it's arguably the best field in PGA Tour history for a regular season event. And so I think what we're going to have is another big-time champion, just like last week. That leaderboard come Sunday is going to be very impressive, and I don't think you're going to have somebody sneak in there and get their first win. I just don't see that happening.
And as Doug mentioned, Rory and Ricky are going to be teamed with CT Pan in one of those featured groups. The featured groups this week, maybe not quite as dynamic as they were last week when we had the top 3 in the world grouped together. But Kyle, still very, very good when you look at, Berger, last week's champ, Brooks Koepka played maybe trying to regain his form. Patrick Reed could be a sleek pick to win this week. And then Rahm, Rose, Justin Thomas as well, Kyle.
Yeah, when I look at these featured groups, I think you're right. There's probably not as much star power kind of packed in there. But I think they're more stylistically diverse. I look at that last group there of DJ, Hideki, and Gary Woodland, and those are 3 very different styles. So I think in terms of a viewer experience, yeah, you might not have as big a names or as, you had the top 3 players in the world grouped together last week. But I think if you're looking for a variation of styles, then maybe this week suits you a little bit better in terms of the featured groups.
Yeah, I like Jon Rahm, Justin Rose, and Justin Thomas. I think that is a dynamic trio. I think we saw last week with those featured groups, a lot of guys were rusty. And even though you're playing with other big names, you're maybe looking to feed off the momentum if somebody gets it going. And those featured groups never really got it going. And so I suspect, again, in this second week, and all these guys are back playing back-to-back weeks. And I'm telling you, on the PGA Tour, when these guys get it going, it's like an engine. It starts up and then it really starts cranking as they play more and more rounds. And I think that's what we're going to see with these feature groups. I think the scoring will be much better at a difficult golf course, by the way.
If you want a peaceful experience, consider tuning into that Dustin Johnson, Hideki Matsuyama, and Gary Woodland group. They might say 5 words combined over a 4-hour period, but that's the one I'm most interested in. Woodland, less than driver course, very small greens, natural landing areas. Doesn't that sound a lot like how he won the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach? And then the return of Hideki Matsuyama, the first time we're going to see him since he was crowned the Players' since he led after the first round at the Players' Championship, and Dustin Johnson, who's trying to round back into form. So very compelling stuff, but that is the group that I'm focusing my attention on.
All right, now to the moment I've been waiting for, and Rick, we're going to give you the floor again because it's time to pick our sleeper. You chose Daniel Berger as your sleeper last week. He, of course, won the tournament. Take it away. Who's your sleeper this week? We're all waiting.
Yeah, no pressure. I do like someone like a JT Poston, but I'm wearing my Oklahoma State orange for Victor Hovland at 66-1. This is an incredibly unique course at Harbor Town that rewards very accurate drivers of the golf ball, and Victor Hovland is just that. He hits 67% of his fairways, which is top 25 in this field, and of those top 25 guys, he hits the ball further than any of them, which is going to come in handy because a lot of the shots at Harbor Town are going to be coming from the same spot. So I want the guy hitting wedge in as opposed to hitting 8-iron in. And then finally, Hovland goes 70, 68, 68, 66, improving every single round last week at the Charles Schwab Challenge. Sign me up for some Victor Hovland.
My alma mater, thanks you, Rick, for making that big. My sleeper this week, Brandon Grace, is somebody who, look, he's 40-1. It's not that big of a sleeper, but Brandon Grace is somebody who, in a normal week at the RBC Heritage, would be more like 20-1 or 25-1 or possibly even the favorite. He's won here before. He played really well last week at Colonial. It got a little buried because he didn't close it out very well. He was in that top 3, top 5 range for a lot of the weekend, but he didn't close. He kind of faded at the end, and there were a lot bigger names, obviously, on the leaderboard than Brandon Grace. So I love his course history here. I love the way he's playing right now. I really like Brandon Grace at 40-1.
Guys, I like the guy from Canada, even though he now lives in South Florida, went to Kent State, so I guess I'm wearing my Kent State Golden Flashes hat right now. Corey Connors. He won last year at Valero, and that's a tough golf course to hit greens. Last season, he led the PGA Tour in greens hit in regulation. He was number 1. This season, he is number 3 in that category. And in the ball striking category, right behind Gary Woodland, is Corey Connors. Now, he's not a household name, but believe me, this guy can stripe the golf ball. He gives himself so many birdie opportunities. And at Harbor Town, again, you have to be good not only with irons from the fairway, but with irons off the tee. I'm telling you, those odds are really, really good for Corey Connors. Don't sleep on the Canadian.
Yeah, he was on top of the leaderboard early on in the week at the Colonial. How about a top 10 lock? Doug, Rory, and Rahm, they both let us down last week.
Yeah, they did. My top 10 lock is Justin Rose. Boy, did he look good last week at Colonial or what? You know, greens in regulation, he hit almost 77% of his greens last week. This was after making the switch to TaylorMade irons, or at least switching back to TaylorMade irons. Justin Rose, he came within just a couple of turns of being in that playoff at Colonial. You know, he was #1 in the world in 2018 for a short time. People forget he's a major champion, and this is the thing I really like about Justin Rose. If you look at the statistics in sand saves, he is 5th in sand saves, getting up and down almost 70% of the time. And the reason that's important, because you cannot go around Harbor Town. You can't go around on a daily basis without being in the sand a number of times. It's a peat dye design, and sand is everywhere. I like Justin Rose. I thought he showed a lot of moxie last week at Colonial, and he sounds to me like a very confident golfer.
Well, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I am going back to Jon Rahm, and I think this is a classic overreaction from Vegas, quite honestly, and from a lot of the general public to kind of write off Jon Rahm, who missed the cut last week. But the way he did it, he lost 4 strokes putting over 2 rounds. That is not Jon Rahm, and that is the worst 2-round putting performance that I have in my database. So odds would say there's no way Jon Rahm's going to lose 4 strokes on the greens again, especially as, you know, we're coming out of this shutdown. We talked about the short game for players being something that might be the last facet of their game to really come around. So lock me in for a Jon Rahm top 10. I'll just buy low and see what happens.
Rick obviously doesn't have any 2 rounds of my short game in his database, because that would rank as the lowest that he has. I agree with his logic there, and that's why I'm going with Rory, because you look at last week, Rory's, I think he was -120 to finish in the top 10, which, again, it's just bad value. It's just not very good value. I still went with him, which was just dumb on my part. But you look at it this week, he's +150. So what has changed? Again, nothing. He's still Rory McIlroy. He's still the best player in the world. He's still been the best player in the world for most of the last 2 years. So all that's happening is you're getting more value at a different course. I really like Rory at +150 to finish in the top 10.
Yeah, and up until last week, he was a top 5 lock. He hadn't finished outside the top 5 since August of 2019. Time to get to winners. Kyle, you can lead us off.
Yeah, you know, my winner this week, Pat Reed. He played really well on the weekend at Colonial. And the thing that I really like about Patrick Reed this week, it's kind of twofold. He's 28-1 to win the golf tournament, which to me, for the #6 player in the world, it's a really good number. But then the other thing, these greens, and this has kind of been mentioned by Doug, and I'm glad he brought it up, these greens at Harbor Town are so small, and there might be nobody in the world who has a better short game around the green than Patrick Reed. And we kind of lose that because of all the other stuff that kind of surrounds Patrick Reed and his career and everything that's going on. But he's an unbelievable short game player. He's had a really good year. He's the #6 player in the world. He has a chance to enter the top 5 like he once talked about, finally, like he once talked about. And I really think he's going to play well at Harbor Town this week.
I really like Justin Thomas, guys. I'll give you a little roll tide. He has 7 top 10s so far this season. You know, he averages almost 5 birdies a round. I mean, think about that. He's a birdie machine, and he's 4th in overall scoring at 68.68. I mean, he's playing tough golf courses and striping it below 69 on average. It's pretty remarkable. And how about this statistic? As far as proximity to the hole, from 125 to 150 yards, he averages 18 feet 3 inches. I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's 3rd on tour in that department. And the reason that's important, you have a ton of shots between 125 and 150 yards at Harbor Town. Last week at Colonial, I talked to Mike, his dad, who was at the event, by the way. Each player's allowed 1 credential to somebody on your team, and he gave to his dad, who's his coach. And Mike told me, hey, if Justin just putts a little bit better, look out, because he really feels that he's striping it good with the irons. So I kind of like JT, and I think Coach Saban may be sending him a little text message for encouragement.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to go with Webb Simpson at 30-1, and there's a theme here. This is overreaction. We live in a world where one event worth of data is probably more difficult to handicap than 0 events worth of data. He gets a big drop in his odds from last week, and it was basically all because of that first round. That Thursday round, he lost nearly 3.5 strokes on approach, which, oh, by the way, is not Webb Simpson. This is a guy who ranks 10th on tour in approach, even after that brutal Thursday round. And, Friday he played much better. He gained 2.5. He looked much more like the Webb Simpson that we know, but it was just too little too late for him to make the cut. Now he gets an increase in odds, and he goes to a place like Harbor Town that should be a much better fit for him, hitting fairways, hitting greens, and rolling in enough putts to get his second victory of the season.
All right, Rick Gehman, Doug Bell, Kyle Porter, thank you so much. That is our grouping here on CBS Sports HQ, getting you ready for another PGA Tour event, this time at Hilton Head. It is the RBC Heritage, and you look at the recap of some of the picks. Rick Gehman, his sleeper last week was Daniel Berger, who won it. This week he's going with Victor Hovland at 66-1. Their picks to win: Reed, Simpson, and Thomas. If you want some DFS advice going into the week, Rick Gehman has you covered on the latest First Cut podcast, which can be downloaded wherever you find your podcasts. Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.